It's not only the K through 12 system failing students. Colleges and universities are not preparing students to succeed in the modern workforce. The cost of higher education are quickly outpacing the value of the degree students receive. According to a nonpartisan analysis, 23% of bachelor's degree programs and 43% of master's degrees have a negative return on investment. Too many students leave college woefully unprepared for the workforce after being saddled with overwhelming debt they cannot pay off. Under the last administration, the Department of Education's only answer was to transfer hundreds of billions of dollars, that's hundreds of billions, in student debt from those who willingly took it on to supposedly advance their life. They transferred it to Americans who either chose not to go to college or had already paid their way through school. To implement these schemes, the department dramatically increased the scope and authority of the student loan financing program, clearly outside of what Congress previously intended. Your experience overseeing SBA loans will be a great asset as the department looks to reform a very broken student loan program. We've also seen rampant anti-Semitism on college campuses, leading to attacks and harassment of Jewish students. I'm pleased to see the Trump administration has already launched investigations, and I look forward to working with you, presuming that you're confirmed. The status quo is not working. The educational system is failing our children. The Biden-Harris Department of Education stood in the way of student success. Transformative change of the educational establishment is needed. The department needs to get out of the way of states and local communities who are best positioned to actually address students' needs. We need to empower parents so that they have a voice in their child's education. This includes increasing access to school choice, perhaps also called parental choice, so families can give their child every opportunity to succeed in the classroom and beyond. With President Trump in office and Ms. McMahon's leadership, we have a real opportunity to accomplish this. Thank you again, Ms. McMahon, for coming before this committee and continuing the discussion on how we can work together to improve student success and get our education system back on track. And with that, I yield to Senator Sanders, the ranking member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. McMahon, nice to see you again. Let me begin by thanking teachers all over this country. This is a very difficult time to be a teacher. And talking to teachers in Vermont, and I think teachers all over the country, what they are telling me is they are spending a lot of their times not only teaching math and English, but dealing with the emotional needs of kids. Because among other things, our kids are struggling in many, many ways. So it's a tough time to be a teacher, and I want to thank the teachers very much for the extraordinary work that they are doing, especially for some of the most vulnerable kids in our country. You know, way back in 1863, as we recall from our history books, Abraham Lincoln was in Gettysburg. And he looked out on a field where soldiers by the thousands had just died in the struggle against slavery, and he talked about the need to maintain a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That was that short but very powerful Gettysburg Address. And I think in this country today, there is a growing fear that instead of having a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, we are looking at a government of billionaires, by billionaires, and for billionaires, whose job is not to improve life for ordinary people, but to make the people on top even wealthier. So in the midst of massive income in wealth inequality, where 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of American society, the Republicans in the House yesterday introduced a budget resolution that would provide massive tax breaks to the people on top, and they would pay for those tax breaks for billionaires by cutting Medicaid, education, and programs that working families throughout this country desperately need. That is exactly the wrong thing to do. At a time when millions and millions of working families are struggling, our job is to protect those families and not worry about the billionaires who have never had it so good. But it's not just cuts in Medicaid, as devastating as that would be. We're looking at, if the Republicans get their way, massive cuts to education. And I should also say that the people who are trying to privatize Social Security, privatize Medicare, privatize Medicaid, privatize the Veterans Administration are precisely the same people who are trying to privatize public education in America. We must not allow that to happen. In America, we must not allow our educational system to become a two-tier system, a system which says that if you have the money, you're going to get help from the federal government, you're going to get a voucher to send your kid to a school that may cost $50,000, $60,000 a year, while the public schools will end up being segregated not just by race, but by class. Most families in America do not have $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year to send their kids to private schools, and it's absurd to provide public money to make that possible. Our job is not to take away money from public schools to give it to private schools. It is to strengthen public education in America. Further, President Trump has talked about abolishing the Department of Education. Yes, I think everybody on this committee wants to see us go after waste and bureaucracy in every agency of government. But what we must understand is that when we talk about the Department of Education, they are providing vital resources for 26 million children in this country who live in high poverty school districts. Is it the responsibility of the federal government to say that every kid in America, whether you're poor, middle class, rich, gets a quality education? It is. And that is what a lot of what the Department of Education does. Department of Education provides millions of public school students who have disabilities, emotional problems, physical problems, provides them with help. It provides Pell Grants and other important financial assistance that over 7 million low-income students need to get a higher education. So the goal is not to abolish the Department of Education, it is to make it more effective and to make sure that it addresses the educational needs in this country. Mr. Chairman, in my view, we need a Secretary of Education who understands that in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, we should have the best educational system on this planet, from child care to graduate school. We need a Secretary of Education who understands that if we're going to attract the best and the brightest to the teaching profession, you know what? We have to pay teachers the kinds of salaries that they deserve, which is why I've introduced legislation that says no teacher in America should earn less than $60,000 a year. We need a Secretary of Education who understands that schools do not end at 2:30 or 3 o'clock. We need strong after-school programs. We need strong summer programs. We need a Secretary of Education who understands that we've got to invest in mental health. We need a Secretary of Education who understands that we have got to fully fund the Individuals with Disability Education Act. So there are a lot of questions I have for Mrs. McMahon. I very much appreciate her being here and look forward to the discussion we'll have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. And now to introduce Ms. McMahon, we'll start with Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. Thank you, committee members, for allowing me to have an opportunity to talk about my good friend, Linda McMahon. I will say that one of the things I love about the Ranking Member is his passion about the things he cares deeply about. He and I don't agree on the conclusions or the solutions, but I do believe that he is a thoughtful person who cares about the issues, and I hope that doesn't hurt your reelection bid. But let me say this. I'm not a billionaire. Never have been, likely never will be. But I am a kid who grew up in a single-parent household, mired in poverty, whose mother worked 2 jobs, trying to keep the lights on. I went to 4 different elementary schools by the 4th grade. When I think about the issue of education, I think about how in the world do we ever get to a meritocracy if the vast majority of the kids today are going to segregated schools that are failing those kids. 13 schools in Maryland where the average kid, 99% of the kids cannot perform at grade level. I think about Chicago on the south side where I spent a lot of time, where 95% of the kids cannot perform at grade level. I think about Charleston, South Carolina, my hometown, where 60+% of African American males don't go to college. I think about the quagmire pit of failure that is consistently the case in inner city schools across America. You talk about the resegregation of America's public schools, it's already happened. It's happening right now. Our public education spends $850 billion to disappoint families, millions of families across this country. 10% of the resources come from the federal government, and yet 80 to 90% of all the rules that suppress performance come from Washington. The average employee at the Department of Education, these numbers are a few years ago, and these unfortunately aren't part of my speech. Bernie changed my speech for me. Is about $106,000, where the average teacher makes $55,000. Those numbers are 4 or 5 years old. But here's my point. My point is a simple point. I'm a guy who understands the weight of a poor education system and the benefit of a good education system, because I've experienced both. I chose to introduce Linda not because I have an affinity for billionaires, though I might now, actually, because I have a passion for quality that changes the trajectory of poor kids' lives permanently. I can't think of a more important civil rights issue today than public education and the education of our kids. I can't think of a better person to take on that challenge than someone that I had confidence when she was the administrator of the SBA. I can't think of someone better to take on this challenge than someone that took a regional company, WWE, and made it into the global powerhouse that it is today than the co-founder, chief executive, Linda McMahon. I can't think of someone better to do the job than someone who served on her own state board of education, who was a trustee at Sacred Heart University, and who led the policy initiatives at the America First Policy Institute. That would be Linda McMahon. I can tell you that there are a lot of questions I'd like to answer, but I don't have time. But I can tell you this. For the poorest kids in our country, disillusioned about the American dream, the answers they are looking for rarely come from Washington. With all of our good intentions, the Department of Education has simply failed the poorest kids in the United States of America, the greatest nation on the planet. To turn that around, we need someone who's already succeeded in business and in government. And let me just close with this. The Department of Education doesn't educate kids. It's a federal agency. Local communities and local teachers educate kids. Our Department of Education is a federal behemoth that needs to focus on getting more money in the hands of more students so that they have a better chance. And yes, I do believe that competition makes your quality go up and your cost go down. Charter schools prove that. Private schools prove that. And finally, Pell Grants. Pell Grants take public dollars to private schools. Unfortunately, poor black kids today, the vast majority, won't have a Pell Grant. Why? Because if you don't graduate from high school, if you don't have proficiency in reading, math, and science, the likelihood of you going to college is zero. Let's improve our K through 12 system so that more of America's poor rural kids and inner city kids both have the experience I have of realizing their version of the American dream.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Very powerful. Senator Britt.
Well, that was amazing. Thank you. My colleague nailed it. Chair Cassidy, Ranking Member Sanders, and members of this committee, I am honored to join you today to introduce President Trump's nominee for Secretary of Education, my friend, Linda McMahon. It is clear that our current education system isn't working. We have the status quo, and that's actually failing our kids. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, the latest NAEP scores show that students' reading and math scores are down in almost every single state, to the point where only 30% of 8th graders are meeting reading proficiency levels. The status quo in education just hasn't failed students. It's failed parents, just like me. And very respectfully, Mr. Ranking Member, the America that you just described, the one that you're fearful will be created, it already exists. Our students deserve better. Our parents deserve better. We have to do something different in order to achieve a different result. For far too long, the Department of Education has catered to far-left bureaucrats at the expense of moms and dads. It has pushed for school closures, removed parental rights from the equation, promoted radical ideologies in the classroom, and supported allowing men and boys to play in women and girls' sports. Enough is enough. We need a change agent at the Department of Education, and that change agent is Linda McMahon. She is the perfect antidote to what is wrong with education in this country. Linda has an immensely successful track record as a business executive, as a leader of a government agency, and at the America First policy, as an America First policy advocate. She is not just an overwhelmingly qualified nominee for Secretary of Education, but a nominee who can make a real difference at the department that sorely needs it. She's also a grandmother of 6, with a personal stake in the quality of our education system. She understands how important it is that our kids learn what they're supposed to, and how important it is for parents to be empowered. I'm right there with her. And that's not the only mission that Linda will pursue at the Secretary of Education as a secretary. Attending a 4-year college or university is the right path for many Americans, but it's not the only one available to graduating high schoolers. And Linda will ensure that students know that. Linda led efforts to empower the American worker at AFPI, and I am confident that she will make aligning our education system and our workforce systems a priority at the Department of Education. That means strengthening 21st century skills, training, and job preparedness, bridging the gap between technical school programs and industries, and expanding apprenticeships and credentialing programs. Linda McMahon is someone who knows how to reform our education system so it actually prepares our kids for the future, while also empowering parents to make decisions that affect their children's lives. She has the experience as an executive. She already demonstrated her immense ability to get the government out of the way as head of the Small Business Administration. And she knows both K-12 and higher education, as my distinguished colleague, Senator Scott, said, in serving on the Connecticut State Board of Education and the Sacred Heart University Board. She was on that since 2004. Her confirmation as Secretary of Education will be a monumental step towards preserving the American dream and making a bright future possible for the next generation of Americans. Let's put parents in the driver's seat. Let's return to the fundamentals of the classroom learning and teach kids the skills they need to actually achieve their goals. Let's put education in the hands of states, not unaccountable federal bureaucrats. And for our kids' sake, let's confirm my friend, Linda McMahon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Britt. Ms. McMahon, now for your opening statement, and you're welcome to introduce your guest.
Thank you very much, Chairman Cassidy. Yes, I'd like to introduce my daughter, Stephanie McMahon, Paul Levesque, her husband, and my son, Shane McMahon. I'm so happy to have them here, and many friends have come from far places, so I welcome having them here today and appreciate that they're here. So, thank you, Chairman Cassidy, Ranking Member Sanders, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm honored to have your consideration to serve as the Secretary of the Department of Education. And I'd like to thank both Senator Scott and Britt for their introductions.
Members of the audience are reminded that disruptions will not be permitted while the committee conducts business. We ask you to respect that. I'm sorry.
Certainly. And I'd like to thank both Senator Scott and Britt for their introductions and for the opportunity to welcome my friends and family. Thank you all so much for being here with me today. I would also like to thank President Trump for his confidence in me to lead a department whose mission and authority were a special focus of his campaign. He pledged to make American education the best in the world, return education to the states where it belongs, and free American students from the education bureaucracy through school choice. November proved that Americans overwhelmingly support the president's vision, and I am ready to enact it. Education is the issue that determines our national success and prepares American workers to win the future. I've been passionate about education since my earliest college days when I studied to earn a teaching certificate. This has continued through my business career as a Connecticut State Board of Education member, as a university trustee, and as the chair of the America First Policy Institute, which advocates for workforce development, parental choice, and accountability in higher education. I'm also a mother and a grandmother, and I join millions of American parents who want better schools for our kids and grandkids. The legacy of our nation's leadership in education is one that every person in this room embraces with pride. Unfortunately, many Americans today are experiencing a system in decline. The latest scores from the nation's report card show achievement in K through 12 math and reading at their lowest level in years. More than 2/3 of public colleges are beset by violent crime on campuses every year. And most tragically, student suicide rates have dramatically increased over the last 2 decades. We can do better. We can do better for the elementary and junior high school student by teaching basic reading and mathematics. For the college freshman facing censorship or anti-Semitism on campus. And for parents and grandparents who worry that their children and grandchildren are no longer taught American values and true history. In many cases, our wounds are caused by the excessive consolidation of power in our federal education establishment. So what's the remedy? Fund education freedom, not government-run systems. Listen to parents, not politicians. Build up careers, not college debt. Empower states, not special interests. Invest in teachers, not Washington bureaucrats. If confirmed as Secretary, I will work with Congress to reorient the department toward helping educators, not controlling them. My experience as a business owner and leader of the Small Business Administration, as a public servant in the state of Connecticut, and more than a decade of service as a college trustee has taught me to put parents, teachers, and students, not bureaucracy, first. Outstanding teachers are tired of political ideology in their curriculum and red tape on their desks. And that's why school choice is a growing movement across the nation. It offers teachers and parents an alternative to classrooms that are micromanaged from Washington, D.C. We should also emphasize career-focused education, especially in cutting-edge STEM fields, where American companies need high-skilled employees. Our workers deserve more post-secondary pathways, career-aligned programs, apprenticeships, and on-the-job learning, and jobs in tech, skilled trades, and healthcare for non-college degree holders. Those who do attend college deserve transparent costs and courses of study aligned to workforce demand. The United States is the world leader by far in emerging technologies like AI and blockchain, and we need to invest in American students who want to become tech pioneers. We should encourage innovative new institutions, develop smart accountability systems, and tear down barriers to entry so that students have real choice and universities are not saddling future families with unsurmountable debt. We must protect all students from discrimination and harassment. And if I am confirmed, the department will not stand idly by while Jewish students are attacked and discriminated against. It will stop forcing schools to let boys and men into female sports and spaces. And it will protect the rights of parents to direct the moral education of their children. The opportunity before us these next 4 years is momentous. I look forward to working with the committee, our nation's parents, teachers, and students, and education leaders from all political perspectives to build a better future for every American learner. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. I shall begin. Everybody's rightly focused on the fact that we have a problem with reading scores, and they've been anchored where they are for quite some time, with an incredibly high percentage of children not reading at grade level. And the old kind of truism that kids learn to read by grade 3 or 4 and they read to learn thereafter. But they're not learning to read by grade 3 or 4. So that said, dyslexia, according to NIH kind of reviewed literature, affects 20% of our population. Those 20% learn to read differently, and if their differences are not acknowledged, then they will be among those, almost an anchor holding reading scores down. Now, it would just intuitively make sense to diagnose the child with dyslexia as early as possible. Most states do not screen. That said, you can see where I'm going with my own thoughts. But what would be your approach to addressing the issue of dyslexia, which is frankly ignored, not in a state like New Hampshire, where Governor Husted actually put in such programs, but in other states? What would be your approach to make sure that the child who's dyslexic is diagnosed at an early stage and receives the intervention that she or he would need to receive?
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Cassidy, and I know this is a very sensitive subject for you, since I believe it is your son that does have dyslexia, as you and I discussed when I visited with you in your office.
My daughter, but that's
I'm
okay.
sorry, it's your daughter. But I certainly very much would like to be sure that we are looking to diagnose issues like dyslexia early, because we have found that it can be turned around. So I'd like to work with you and understand how we could have better approach for that in our school systems.
You had mentioned that you would not tolerate the anti-Semitism that has been on the rise. What steps would you take to make sure the backlog of anti-Semitism cases at the Office of Civil Rights is processed and those responsible for illegal discrimination held accountable?
Senator Kennedy, Cassidy, I think that by far what we saw happening on our campuses was absolutely deplorable. Kids locked in libraries, afraid to come out. Now, I believe in freedom of speech on campus, open debate, and we should encourage that. But we cannot allow violence happening on our campuses. That puts all students in an unsafe place. And if I were confirmed as the Secretary of Education, I would want to make sure that the presidents of those universities and those colleges are taking very strong measures not to allow those to happen. They can call in the police, they can do whatever they need to do, set standards, and to make sure those standards are upheld. We cannot allow that kind of violence to take place on our college campuses.
Now, there's a current backlog in the Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Education to address this. Do you have any specific plans about how you could help them address that backlog?
Well, I'd like very much to be confirmed and to be able to get into the department and understand that backlog, to talk to those lawyers who were there, and let's focus on what we need to do to clear out that backlog. And I look forward to doing that.
President Trump is reportedly drafting an executive order requiring the Secretary of Education to develop a plan for downsizing the Department of Education and working with Congress to eliminate entirely. Yes or no, do you agree that since the department was created by Congress, it would need an act of Congress to actually close the Department of Education?
And certainly President Trump understands that we'll be working with Congress. We'd like to do this right. We'd like to make sure that we are presenting a plan that I think our senators could get on board with and our Congress could get on board with, that would have a better functioning Department of Education, but certainly does require congressional action.
Okay. In terms of the plans to downsize, what would be the components of that plan that would not require congressional approval?
Well, I do believe, Senator, that there are departments of education that are established by statute. And those particular departments we'd have to pay particular attention to. But long before there was a Department of Education, we fulfilled the programs of our educational system. Are there other areas, other agencies where parts of the Department of Education could better serve our students and our parents on a local level? And I am really all for the President's mission, which is to return education to the states. I believe, as he does, that the best education is closest to the child and not certainly
If the
from
department
Washington,
is
D.C.
downsized, would the states and localities still receive the federal funding which they currently receive?
Yes.
Okay. With
It
that,
is not the President's goal to defund the programs. It is only to have it operate more efficiently.
With that, I yield to Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we talk about education, kind of we're looking at it in a vacuum. We're talking about the struggles that low-income kids are having, and that's true. But Mrs. McMahon, you are also aware that in America we have more income and wealth inequality than we've ever had before. You are aware that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. You are aware, I suspect, that teachers are dealing with kids who are literally homeless, kids who come from dysfunctional families where there is violence. Does it concern you in America that we are living in a society where the people on top are doing phenomenally well, while 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck? And how do you think that impacts our educational system?
Thank you very much, Senator, for that question. First of all, let me say that I believe that teaching is one of the most noble professions that we have in our country, and we have so many good, dedicated teachers to help our students. I do think that we are trapping students often in low-performing schools, and that's why the President has such a strong policy towards school choice.
But you will agree, I don't mean to interrupt you, but you will agree that you can't just look at education. The truth is that middle class, upper middle class public schools in America generally do pretty well. But if you are homeless, if you were a homeless person and you had kids, the odds of your kids doing pretty well, and I'm just asking you, what do you think about the massive level of income and wealth inequality, the fact that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty? Is that something you think you might want to pay attention to?
Well, certainly, Senator, I do believe that we want to make sure that every child in our country has the opportunity to have equal access to a quality education. And the Department of Education really is not setting economic policy in the country.
Well,
we should focus on educating our children, and we should focus on it at the local level.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned correctly that we have many great teachers in America, right?
Yes.
If you as a businesswoman wanted to attract the best and the brightest, would you be starting them off after they leave school, maybe $50,000, $60,000 in debt with salaries of $35,000 or $40,000? Or would you say, we respect, you talked about teaching being the noblest profession. I agree with you. Would you agree with me, support my legislation that says no teacher in America should earn at least $60,000 a year?
Well, certainly the pay to teachers is up to the states where those teachers reside. I do believe we should pay our teachers fairly. They spend so much time with our students, and they should be well
All right,
compensated
but
for their
paying them
job.
fairly, nobody in the world will disagree with you. I mean, the question is, if teaching is a noble profession, if teaching is an important profession, should we be paying them salaries commensurate with the value of the work that they are doing? So I'm asking you a simple question. Would you recommend to states, as the leader of education in America, that teachers at least make $60,000 a year?
I would certainly recommend to states that teachers be paid what is commensurate with the kinds of jobs that are part of their states. Not all states have the same living costs. Not all states have the same ability to pay teachers, but to attract really good teachers and to keep them, we should definitely pay them commensurate with the job performance that they are undertaking.
Millions of young people, low-income people, are finding it very difficult to afford to go to college, and they're leaving school $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 in debt. Pell Grant program provides assistance to over 7 million low-income young people in this country. Can you guarantee to us, if you are made a Secretary of Education, that no student in America will lose their Pell Grant as the department is dismantled?
Certainly, the defunding is not the goal here. The continuation of Pell Grants, I'd actually even like to see an expansion of Pell Grants. I'd like to see short-term certificates for Pell Grants for students who aren't going on to four-year universities, who could have the opportunity to use Pell Grants for skill-based learning.
All right, so what I'm hearing you say is Pell Grant program will continue under your administration.
Yes.
Okay. Senator Cassidy asked you an important question, and that is, do you agree? Let me just once again get your feelings on this, that if there is a movement to abolish the Department of Education, it has to go through the United States Congress?
Yes, it is set up by the United States Congress, and we work with Congress. It clearly cannot be shut down without it.
Good. Thank you.
Senator Collins.
Thank you. Welcome. First of all, let me say I was very pleased to hear your strong commitment to enforcing the Office of Civil Rights jurisdiction over the many incidences, horrible incidences of anti-Semitism that we've seen on our college campuses. Among the important programs that are administered by the Department of Education are Title I, IDEA, and the TRIO programs, all of which have been high priorities for me. I want to briefly discuss those programs. Title I helps public schools that are serving low-income students. It helps level the playing field in terms of resources compared to more affluent communities. In Maine, 63% of our public schools receive Title I funds. Very important to our state. Second, IDEA, the Disabilities in Education Act, which helps children with special needs. Maine receives more than $65 million to support K through 12 students with special education needs. I would note that that falls far short of the 40% that was promised when the legislation was passed in the 1970s. TRIO programs, which we've discussed, have changed the lives of countless first-generation students who are going to college and come from families with no experience with higher education. I've seen so many success stories as a result of TRIO. So my question for you is, how do we maintain the administration and oversight of these programs if we abolish or substantially reorganize the Department of Education?
Thank you, Senator Collins, and I know how passionate you are about these issues, and I enjoyed meeting with you in your office and talking about these various things, especially I think the TRIO program, which we both agreed was just hit a terrible blow just by regulation when some of the students who were applying, their applications were rejected simply because of spacing on a form.
Right.
And that kind of regulatory control just cannot stand. That is just impossible. The Title I programs that you've been discussed will continue to be appropriated through Congress. Today, they go directly to the State Department of Education and then are distributed to the districts. We're not looking to defund or reduce any of those amounts. IDEA is the same, but might it be better served in a different agency? I'm not sure. It started at HEW, and the concerns for disabilities and health issues with students may very well rest better within an agency that has more oversight of all of those. So I think if I am confirmed to be able to get in and assess programs, how they can have the best oversight possible, how we can really take the bureaucracy out of education and focus on teaching our children to read and to do math and to appreciate our history is certainly my goal and would be my goal as the Secretary of Education.
Thank you. On Monday, the administration announced that the Department of Education was going to terminate 89 contracts from the Institute of Education Sciences. They were worth $881 million, as well as terminating 29 training grants. This week, my office heard from a former teacher from Oakland, Maine, who has developed a high-impact tutoring model, and it's currently being used in 12 schools in Maine alone, and she has one of the grant applications pending to more thoroughly evaluate the impact of this model on the students' outcomes. She's worried that it's now going to be in jeopardy due to these sudden cuts. Considering the poor reading and math scores reported by NAEP, and that unfortunately includes poor scores in my home state, shouldn't the Department of Education continue to collect data and evaluate outcomes rather than halt these activities so that you can help states know what works?
Well, thank you, Senator, and it is my goal, if I am confirmed, to get in and assess these kinds of programs, because I'm not sure yet what the impact of all of those programs are. I know that there are many worthwhile programs that we should keep, but I'm not yet apprised of them. I want to study them. I'd like to get back and talk to you more and to work with you. I look forward to working with this committee and all of Congress to make sure we can deliver for our education.
Thank you. I appreciate your responses.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The committee will come to order. Senator Murray.
Thank you, Ms. McMahon. Elon Musk's Doge staffers have reportedly set up camp at the Department of Education. They've already been given access to highly sensitive student data and have already started holding back money that Congress decided on a bipartisan basis was needed to help our schools and students. We're also hearing, as you know, about an executive order coming any day that will seek to dismantle the Department of Education. These are bipartisan laws. You indicated that you understood that Congress has passed these laws, but a lot of turmoil is happening. You heard it from my colleague just asking that question now. So I want to ask you, if confirmed, do you commit to getting every dollar we have invested in our students and schools out to them?
Well, the appropriated dollars and those monies that are passed by Congress, yes. I have no issue, however, with the fact, and I believe the American people spoke loudly in the election last November to say that they want to look at waste, fraud, and abuse in our government. So DOJ, there are a couple of implants at the Department of Education, as there are with agencies throughout the district, and they're doing an audit.
Right,
You know,
I understand
and
an
it's-
audit, but when Congress appropriates money, it is the administration's responsibility to put that out as directed by Congress, who has the power of the purse. So what will you do if the president or Elon Musk tells you not to spend money Congress has appropriated to you?
We will certainly expend those dollars that Congress has passed, but I do think it is worthwhile to take a look at the programs before money goes out the door. It's much easier. It is much
I
easier
understand that, but
to
the
stop the money as it's going out the
by
door
law
than
is
it is to claw it back.
Process by law is that you look at that, you make recommendations to Congress, and we implement those laws. So, I mean, the question really is, who decides how much federal funding public schools get in Seattle, where it's already been allocated? The school district or Elon Musk or Congress? And I think Congress has been pretty clear that the purse lies here. We pass our appropriations bills. We expect those programs to come. If you have input, if you have programs you have looked at that you believe are not effective, then it is your job to come to us, explain why, and get the support for that. Let me move on. Ms. Mann, I believe that our nation's students, families, and taxpayers do want true accountability. They do want improvement in our schools. Back in 2015, Congress came together in a bipartisan way to replace the No Child Left Behind Act with the new law, Every Student Succeeds Act. That was a bill I was very proud to negotiate with my Republican counterpart on this committee, passed it into law. It gives states more flexibility in using their federal education funds. It eliminated those one-size-fits-all mandates that everyone hated, and it established some really strong federal guardrails to hold states and schools accountable. I believe that the Department of Education must do more to implement that law. Right now, less than 42% of our schools identified for comprehensive support and improvement, or CSI as we call it, had a plan that met all the requirements of that law. And 1 in 5 schools' plans included practices we know are ineffective. National assessment results, as you well know, released a few weeks ago, show that our lowest performing students continue to fall furthest behind. So I want to ask you, what specific actions will you take to implement the ESSA law? I'm not looking for an exhaustive list, but can you name a couple of the requirements that are in that law that you will make sure are implemented?
Well, Senator, thank you, and I would look forward to working with you in the committee, understanding more about the ESSA laws.
Do you know what the requirements are? Do you know about the requirements for targeted support improvement schools or the annual report card requirement? Can you name any of the requirements
Yes,
that are in that?
I have read through ESSA, and I do know, it's very interesting. It's how I really got into education in the first place, was when No Child Left Behind was in place.
But there are no requirements that you can tell me right now that you will make sure, as Secretary of Education, you will implement?
No, I want to study it further and get back to you with that, and I'll be happy to do that.
Well, let me ask one last question. As I mentioned, those staff have been given access in the Department of Education to personal information of students and families, like their Social Security numbers and their driver's license numbers and their date of birth, what college they're enrolled in. I know that the access has been temporarily paused due to litigation, but there is a real potential for that kind of information to be abused, or for students' privacy to be placed in jeopardy if the courts end up ruling against the students. And we know that DOJ could use that highly personal information to then target students and target their families, or cut off access to Pell Grants for students at college that someone perceives opposes maybe President Trump policy. So I want to ask you, do you believe that DOJ employees should have access to private student data?
It is my understanding that DOJ employees have been onboarded as employees of the Department of Education, and therefore they operate under the restraints of utilizing excessive information, and they are constrained by
That is not
that.
our understanding, and I have to tell you,
That's my
it's
understanding.
deeply concerning that we have DOJ staffers, we don't know who they are, they're not held accountable, getting access to students' private information. I think that should frighten everyone.
Well, again, I'm not there
Thank you,
yet.
Madam Chair.
So I'm not there yet, but it is my understanding that they are onboarded,
I
fully
hope
employees.
if you do get there that you make sure that students' private information is not given to someone who's no idea what they have, or we have no idea how they're using it. Thank you.
Senator Husted.
Thank you. Ms. McMahon, thank you, or congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you.
Look forward to your confirmation, hopefully, and working with you on what is arguably one of the most important issues to the future of our country and to our children. I would just simply ask you if you believe that education is foundational to the opportunity to live your version of the American dream for children. You agree with that?
I certainly do agree with that, and thank you very much, Senator, for that question. Education, I think, is at the very center of our culture. It is the ticket out of poverty for so many students. It is how our children's minds are absolutely cultivated so that they can learn. And I remember listening to Senator Cassidy when he said that every child up until the third grade learns to read, and then after the third grade reads to learn. And if children cannot read at a proficiency level, they cannot continue to learn. They can't then be proficient in school. They can't go forward to higher education. They can't even start a business or do anything. So education, I do believe, is at the very center of what we need to do and to ensure that we have the best education for our students and that they all have equal access to a quality education.
Thank you. The issue of inequality has come up in this hearing, and I can tell you as when I started in my elected career, I was a Green state legislator in the state of Ohio who had this strange notion that if children were trapped in chronically failing schools, that they should have the opportunity to go somewhere else. And that I thought, who could be against that? And I quickly found out, well, there were a lot of people who were against that. Powerful people, powerful institutions. And I just believe that we as Americans, we believe that freedom and choice is good. It's part of our DNA. It's good for markets and business, and that monopolies don't work, whether that's big business or big government. And that has been reinforced to me over the course of basically my lifetime that I've worked on this issue. Foundationally or fundamentally, billionaires have choice. Their children have choice. It's children that grow up in poverty that don't have choice. And that is an important element of fixing inequality, because if we say that an education is foundational to living your version of the American dream, yet you don't have the choice to go to a school that serves your needs, we basically have institutionalized a barrier against that opportunity and to have that equality of opportunity. Just share with me how you hope to fix that.
Well, certainly the president, one of his cornerstones relative to education is school choice. He certainly does believe in universal school choice, and we have seen, I think that there are now, I believe the number's 33 states, I might be corrected on that, states that do have school choice. And what we have found that public schools come up, they're competitive. A lot of the concerns relative to school choice, I think the statistics, belie. We have students that are not leaving public schools in hordes and going to other schools, but they have the opportunity. Parents look at their children and say, I want that for my child. My school is failing my child. So if I have the opportunity to have an educational savings account or a voucher program or a scholarship program to get my child maybe to that charter school or to that other public school that is doing better than the one that my child is here because this is where I live, but I know that if I could get my child to that next school, they would be better off. Every parent wants that opportunity for their child.
Thank you. And just quickly, I made some calls to superintendents in my state in Ohio before I came today, and I said, would you prefer to have the money sent directly to you rather than than through the federal Department of Education? And do you think you could do a better job if we released you from the rules and regulations and you just said, and they said, yes, tell us what you want us to achieve, we'll achieve it, we'll do it. And I just wanted to share that with you, and that I also want to give you a chance to answer this, that you're not, and President Trump is not talking about cutting any funding for children. You're not talking about cutting funding for disabled children. You're just talking about changing the way that the money gets to these students in schools, and that you're committed to that. Is that correct?
That is correct, Senator. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
It is now Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I start my questions, just wanted to put some studies in the record. Recent research studies of private school vouchers in Louisiana, Indiana, Ohio, and Washington, D.C. showed that students who used these vouchers performed worse academically than their public school peers. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record those 4 studies that show private school vouchers have a negative impact on student achievement.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. McMahon, I appreciated the opportunity to meet with you last month, and I believe in giving all the president's nominees a fair shake. That's what the people of Wisconsin expect from me, and I look forward to hearing more about your approach to running the Department of Education if confirmed. Mrs. McMahon, since 1972, Title IX has been a critical tool in ensuring that all students are protected from sex-based discrimination in federally funded education programs. We briefly discussed Title IX in our meeting, but I'd like to ask you a series of yes or no questions to get into a little bit more detail here. So yes or no, do you believe that Title IX should be enforced to protect students from sexual harassment and sexual assault?
Yes, I do.
Do you believe that sexual harassment that is severe should be prohibited under Title IX?
I think sexual harassment should be prohibited in any case.
Thank you. Do you believe that sexual harassment that is pervasive should be prohibited by Title IX?
Yes.
Do you believe that harassment that is either severe or pervasive should be prohibited under Title IX?
I don't believe there should be any acceptance of sexual harassment, Senator.
Great. Because I'm glad you actually agree with President Trump's efforts during his first term to narrow what qualifies as sexual harassment under Title IX. His guidance said that sexual harassment had to be severe and pervasive. And I hope that you will take your position and press for that to be the law. But right now, the Title IX is limited to sexual harassment that is severe and pervasive, not severe or pervasive. Yes or no, if an assault occurs between 2 students, but it happens off campus, do you think the school should have the ability to investigate that matter?
I think the school should investigate that matter, and I believe under the regulations today, and I could be corrected on that, that they are obligated to investigate.
Okay, and do you believe that the school then, after investigation, should have the ability to take actions regarding an incident that occurs off campus?
Yes, I think the school should be required to take those actions and to investigate and to notify the parties that are involved, and that so that both sides of the equation can have due process.
I appreciate your answer. It is not entirely clear at this matter, at this time, that the incidents would not only be investigated, but adjudicated as to the school's adjudication rules. And the problem with that, as I'm sure you're well aware, is that you would have the potential of a victim of sexual assault facing the potential of attending class with their perpetrator. You know, despite how much this administration likes to talk about protecting women and girls, the actions have not matched the rhetoric. And so I think instead of actually protecting women and girls, this administration is not making school a safer place for anyone, while using this topic as a way to fearmonger and demonize others. Mrs. McMahon, you have been named in a lawsuit which alleges that you and your husband allowed for systemic and pervasive abuse of underage children to persist in your business for years. It is an ongoing lawsuit, and it alleges that you rehired a known sexual predator, and you felt it was sufficient to simply direct him to steer clear of children. If confirmed, you will be responsible with overseeing the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, charged with ensuring equal access to education through vigorous enforcement of civil rights laws. I am so concerned about whether sexual assault survivors on campus can trust you to support them.
Thank you, Senator. They certainly can trust me to support them. I have a granddaughter that is now in college. I have 2 grandsons who are in college. And I have a deep commitment of understanding of how I would feel if any of them were involved in sexual harassment or accused of sexual harassment. You have my absolute commitment that I will uphold and protect those investigations to make sure that those students are treated fairly on both sides.
Mrs. McMahon, we met shortly after a shooting at... You're a minute over. Oh, I will submit this question for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Tuberville.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. McMahon, thank you for being here today, and thanks for wanting to take on this monumental task. You know, I'm a football coach. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a business guy. I taught high school and worked my way up for 40 years. This country gives you one thing, and it's what I taught my kids when I coached. This country doesn't owe you anything but an opportunity. And that's the reason this country is the greatest country on the face of the earth. Now, when you lose that opportunity, and I've lost many times, I've got my tail back up and gone again. But that's where you learn it, through education. I've been to every state in this country recruiting, going through high schools except for Alaska in my 40 years. In my 40 years of coaching and going into high school, there's not been a bigger disappointment than our education system. I've seen it decline for 40 years. It's gotten worse. You're going to have the task of trying to bring it back. It's going to be hard to do because you're going to be fought from every side. This is not Democrat, Republican, black, white. It's not. It's an American problem. I've spent tens of thousands of dollars of my budget when I coach and bringing kids in. After I tested them, they couldn't read past the 6th grade and reading level, but they had 3.5 GPAs when they came to my university. We're failing. It is a disaster. If you can't read, you can't learn. And that's one of the first things that we got to get back to, is teaching our kids to read. We got a lot of teachers that don't teach reading like you and I learned. It's different. We have all this nonsensical teaching of what we call Common Core of math. I still ain't figured that out. But thanks for wanting to take this on, because there's a lot of obstacles going to be in your way. And so don't be afraid to make changes. We've had a K through 12 system for years. It's a failure. It is an absolute failure. Let's teach our kids. That's the only chance they got to survive in this world, which is going to be very, very competitive. Now, we have things that get in our way. And what's deterring our kids nowadays? That thing right there. I had problems coaching with it. I was enemy number one when I told them, put that damn phone up. Don't bring it to my dressing room, because I want you to listen and learn, not be on there listening to music and read the nonsense you see on there. So you got a lot of obstacles. The one thing I think we need to do is just look at K through 12 and What do we do? How do we get better? I'm all for workforce development in the last 2 years of high school, teaching kids to learn to use their hands. And what's your thoughts on that, about work in high school? I'm not talking about past high, I'm talking about the last couple of years.
Well, thank you, Senator. I think when you and I met in your office, and I appreciated that time, I discussed with you that I probably dated myself by saying that when I was in high school, in your senior year in high school, you could take a vocational program, which meant that you went to school the first part of the day. The second part of the day, you could have a job. You could be learning a skill or a trade, and those credits would count towards your education. I think we need to get back to more of that. We are not teaching skill-based learning in our schools anymore. And I think we have to look at our entire education system and say, you know, four-year college is not for everyone. For those particular jobs that require, you know, doctors, lawyers, engineers, that require 4 years, then I think.
Ms. McMahon, please suspend. The committee will come to order. Capitol Police are asked to remove the individual from the room.
I don't think she knows how to read or
Again,
listen.
members of the audience are reminded that disruptions will not be permitted while the committee conducts its business. With that, Ms. McMahon, please resume.
Thank you. So I think we do have to get back to teaching basics, you know, in school K through 12, but to continue on to what we were talking about, but we don't have enough skill-based learning. We don't have enough internships or apprenticeship programs. I'd also like to see, you know, more dual credits in our high schools, our junior and senior years, that would count towards community colleges or other institutes that would get students through college faster if in fact that is the plan that they are going to take. So we have so much that we can do to help our students get prepared to have a good income and a good livelihood. And if they can graduate from high school with some skill-based already, they can even start